Well, good day there, everybody. This is Joe Van Cleve, and today I'm going to talk about how to make your own bellows for a large format camera in the same style that I used maybe a decade ago to make the bellows for this camera that I recently made last week. You might remember the video about this 5x7 format bellows camera that is used for lumen photography. And this is a bellows that I had made about 10 years ago, an experimental design. It had been sitting around in my garage since then, and it seems like it's held up pretty nicely. So it worked pretty well, I think, for this application. So I thought I would show you guys a little bit about how to make one of these for yourselves. When I built this bellows, I started with the Speed Graphic camera that I have. I use the Speed Graphic as a template for how the folds are made in the bellows. There's probably several different styles or design ideas for making a bellows. The main thing about this design is it is essentially an untapered bellows. That is to say, the size of the front is the same as the size of the back. The corners are all parallel to each other, and it doesn't taper down into a smaller front size. You could, though, use the same construction technique and make a tapered bellows if you wish, but it's a lot easier and a little bit more economical on the paper to make a non-tapered bellows. So for my application, it worked fine. Okay, so this is my anniversary Speed Graphic camera, and you might notice the way the bellows works here is I think it's very slightly tapered, but it's pretty much straight. It doesn't taper nearly as much as a more modern view camera or an 8x10 might. But the important point to notice here about the design of it is the corners essentially are zigzag folds, and you have hills and valleys folds, and viewed from the outside of the bellows, each facet of the bellows forms a trapezoid shape, and the valley folds in the trapezoid are the longer folds. They go from the point here to the point there, whereas the hill folds are the shorter of the two folds. So you have a series of parallel folds, in and out, in and out, in and out, hill, valley, hill, valley, hill, valley. And the same is true on the sides. The valley folds are the longer creases, and the hill folds are the shorter creases. Now, when I went into the design and conceptualization of this particular bellows about a decade ago, of course I decided I wanted, for simplicity's sake, to make it a straight bellows without a taper, and I also had to figure out how much paper I was going to need. I knew I wanted to make it from one continuous sheet of black paper, and what I was thinking about was using a black craft paper, a large sheet of it that was stiff enough that it could be creased along the edges and folded, and whereas the body of the paper would be stiff enough to act like a stiffener. And then what I was going to do was use this black cloth gaffers tape to reinforce all the folds, and it would serve two purposes. One purpose is that it makes the paper fold much more mechanically durable over time. It's a cloth tape, and you can fold it repeatedly and the cloth simply bends, whereas the paper underneath will become brittle as you constantly fold it and refold it, and it would eventually start having pinhole leaks in the paper if you didn't have the gaffers tape there. The gaffers tape, of course, also serves as a light tight medium. It is light tight tape. The black paper you need to choose for this project also needs to be light tight, so it has to be thick enough. And so you're covering up any slight pinholes that might result from these folds with the tape. The tape provides the mechanical rigidity and flexibility for that. And so it's an interesting design, and it's not waterproof because you still have exposed paper. The tape is not waterproof, and if you got heavy amount of water on it, it would seep in through the paper or through the cloth tape onto the adhesive and loosen the adhesive as it contacts the paper. So this is not a waterproof, weatherproof bellows by any means, but on the other hand, a lot of the traditional wooden view cameras, you wouldn't want to really get wet either with rain. So it may not be quite as much of a limitation as you might think, having a non-weatherproof bellows. Well, a good question you might have is, how did they make these traditional bellows? Well, they're made from 2 layers of light, tight, bendable, pliant material, probably leather in this case, an inner and an outer layer with stiffeners on between the 2 layers on these facets, the flat faces of the bellows. If you look from the side to the top to the other side, you'll see that it looks like it's one continuous piece of material, and it is. So the obvious question is, how is it made? How do they join it together? And you'll see on the bottom here, underneath the bed of the camera, on top of the bed of the camera, this is where the 2 edges of the outer layer come together. There's an outer layer again, and then there's an inner layer, and it's light tight between the 2. So I knew essentially that I would need to have the 4 faces of the camera, of the bellows, would be continuous, and then the 4th piece would be cut in 2. You'd have a half piece here and a half piece here. And so I've kind of drawn a very crude diagram, very poorly drawn. Essentially, you would have your top of the bellows, your left side, right side, and then a half of the bottom piece on either end. You would make this out of one continuous piece of material. I'm using thick craft paper. You have parallel lines that are scored in the paper, again very poorly drawn, but basically those are the creases for your bellows. And then you have a series of zigzag lines at each corner, and that's what produces the corner folds, which is the whole secret to the bellows. And I'll show you here in a little bit how I do that. You'll have a half of a bottom, a side, top, and the other side, and the other half, and then the bellows is joined together at the bottom with a straight seam. These 2 ends come together. And so I wanted to make this out of black craft paper. I knew it was thick enough and strong enough, and it was light tight, and I knew that I could score the paper and make it fold, but I wanted to reinforce it with something that would make it durable and light tight, and that's where I chose the black gaffers tape. I had an inch-wide black gaffers tape when I made this bellows, and I think it's the same width as this. This is also inch-wide tape. And so when I made this bellows here, I made each facet, each of these pieces, an inch wide also. But of course, when you fold the tape over the edge to reinforce the corner, you're going to have a little bit in the middle where the paper is exposed. So it's not completely covered in tape. There is some areas in the middle where the paper is exposed, which is the main reason why it's not a waterproof bellows. So I started with one big sheet of paper. I tried to find the largest piece of heavy black craft paper I could find. I think it was 24 by 30 inches. And this is the kind of paper that is stiff enough to be used in scrapbook pages. It's, I don't know if you can tell how thick this is, but that's the kind of paper it is, very thick and heavy. So I started with a pattern, and this bellows wasn't intended to be for any particular camera design or any particular film format. It was just the largest pattern I could make on this particular piece of paper with inch-deep, inch-wide pleats. And so I started with a pencil, and I drew in a straight edge, and I drew a rectangle, and I drew all these parallel lines that were an inch apart, and then I had to draw the diagonal zigzag lines for the 4 edges of the bellows where the pleats were, and that was done all in pencil, mind you. And then the thing was how to make those lines so they would be scored and so the paper would easily fold. And what I found worked really well was you put the piece of paper against a hard surface, and a hard even surface, using a good straight edge and a ballpoint pen, like a medium ballpoint pen. You don't want to get a fine point because it might actually cut the paper. You want it just to score it without cutting it. So I used a medium, probably a Bic Biro pen, and very carefully pressing very heavily and evenly, I scored all of these lines so they would fold. And so I've decided I'm not going to make a whole nother bellows for this video, but I'm just going to show you how that process works with just one of the corners with 2 of the pieces. And so I've decided I'm going to use some yellow manila cardstock in the demonstration of this procedure. It is stiff enough, pretty similar in stiffness to the black paper. The manila cardstock is actually a little thinner than the black craft paper, but it has very similar stiffness. And you'll be able to see it a little bit easier being light colored rather than being black. You can see the lines easier on camera. So let's go right to that whole process of how I lay the lines out, do the folding, how to make the part of the bellows. So I've taken this 8.5 by 11 manila cardstock, and I've marked a series of lines of points that are 3/4 of an inch apart along both of the 8.5 inch sides. And I'm going to connect these with parallel lines, and they're going to be done in ballpoint pen, and I'm going to press fairly hard on the ballpoint pen in order to score the paper for assistance with folding it later on. Okay, so I used a hard desktop surface and a medium point ballpoint pen. This is a big biro blue pen, and anyways, I've pressed pretty hard on the paper with my pen against the hard surface underneath the paper. And you have to be sure that you really press hard on your straight edge, because the hard surface is kind of slippery, and your straight edge could slip if you're doing any kind of lateral force like it did here, where I got a little squiggly with the line. But hopefully I went back over it a second time and pushed even harder, and you might be able to see, not sure if you can see it, but there are some score lines visible through the back side, and that is an indication that I should have, hopefully it should be hard enough of a line that it'll score and fold easily when I do the folds later on. So because this mock-up is going to be representing just one corner where two sides join, and we're going to be really illustrating how the pleats are made in the corners, you want to have 45-degree pleats. And so what I've done is I've marked two lines that are 3/4 of an inch wide, which represents the spacing between the ridges of the bellows. And these lines in pencil are going to give me guidelines for drawing the diagonals in pen that I'm going to score for the folds. And the result is a zigzag line down the middle of the pattern. These corners here between the zigzags are 90 degrees. And so it's really, the pattern is really just a series of parallel lines with a zigzag running up the middle for the corner pleats. And of course you might be able to see the shadows of the heavily pressed ink line on the back side of the manila cardstock. Now the bellows that I patterned my homemade bellows after, and which this is kind of loosely patterned after, is my speed graphic bellows. And in that bellows, the longer edge, which represents the lines that go up to the vertex here, those are going to be the edges that are on the inside of the bellows. So those are going to be valleys, if you will, viewed from the outside of the bellows. Whereas the lines that are coming off the top of the vertex this way, the shorter lines, are going to be the hills on the outside of the bellows. So it'll be folded alternately in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out to make this accordion pleat on the paper. Okay, so I've made an initial series of folds in the paper along the lines, and the paper folds quite nicely due to the stiffness of it. But what might not be so obvious initially, but will become obvious when you soon begin to study the design of the bellows, is that the corners here of the zigzag represent the place where the hill of folds on one side have to transition to a valley fold on the other, and that's how the whole pattern becomes bent at a 90-degree angle to form a corner. So you're really not wanting just to fold each edge one direction, but you want to fold them back the other way in order for them to be flexible enough for one half the line to be a valley fold and the other one to be a hill fold. And then before we do the final manipulation of the form into its final shape, we're going to also have to pre-fold the diagonal lines to make those folds. And that pre-folding can be a little bit tricky because you're having to fold each one separately. But I'm going to go ahead and try that now. And I'm folding all of these diagonal folds toward me. They're all going to be toward me to make valley folds. And yeah, you have to kind of manipulate the paper and bend it a little bit to get those properly shaped. So we want this inked surface is going to be the inside of the bellows, so this side will be folded up and this will be this way. So these longer folds will be valley folds from the outside, but they're going to be ridges on the inside. And you kind of see already, just like right here, you can see how the bellows starts to form itself as you kind of start manipulating cardstock, the stiff paper. So these lines on the right side all need to be, the ones that are longer all need to be folded up, and all the ones that are shorter on this side need to be folded down. And the net result is this. This is the left side of the pattern. This was the original folds we did. They're still in the same direction. Then the right side of the pattern, we had to reverse the long folds from the left. And after having creased the zigzag pattern, we're able to bunch these together in their right configuration, bunch these together in their right configuration, and these two sides are opposite each other. And then in the middle, we kind of manipulate the pattern and get the pleats to conform to the scored lines. And the result is you can squish them down and make the corner of your bellows. This is basically two sides that are joined together. And in the actual practice of making a real full bellows, you would have these two. You would have a third side here, which is simply on a wider piece of paper, another set of diagonal creases. That makes three sides. And then coming off the end of this one, you have another set and a half length of pleats, a half side, and on the end of the third one another half side, and those two half sides join on the bottom to form the fully closed bellows. But this is basically the initial fold you're going to do in this stiff paper, and this is how you get to that point. And okay, so the net result from this little demonstration is we have what could be just two of the four sides of the bellows. And this is really, again, just demonstrating how one set of corners is made. But in practice, if you're actually making a real bellows out of this material, which you wouldn't, by the way, because it's translucent, it's not opaque, but you would have, again, one section, another section, a third section, and then coming off the two ends would be a half of a fourth, all in one continuous piece of paper. And so you're going to have four edges for these. But again, it makes the classic bellows 90-degree corner, just like that, just like we have up here. And so before you put the bellows together, you have this whole pattern. It's been scored and it's been folded like this. You don't want to assemble the bellows until you've put the tape down now. And so this is probably the most lengthy and crucial part of the whole process, is that all of the hill folds you want to apply the tape to. So on the outside of the bellows, you're going to put tape, gaffer's tape, along the length of these ridges on the top and sides, right? All of the hill folds that stick up. And then on the inside, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to apply tape to all of the hill folds viewable from inside, which, if you look at it, correspond to the valley folds on the outside. So you're reinforcing every one of the creased folds, creased edges of the bellows with tape on one side. And the reason why you're doing it on the hills of that side is because it's just impossible to get the tape into a valley without it sticking prematurely, not being able to get it down into the edge. So you're going to do it on top, and you're going to fold it very neatly. And this gaffer's tape needs a little bit of pressure in order to activate the glue really well. So you're going to have to press and flatten it out and make sure it sticks really good. Now, you'll notice, for instance, on this fold right here, you're going to put tape on. There is a 90-degree corner right here that you come up against, and you're going to have to trim the tape at a 90-degree angle. You're going to have to cut it to a very particular exact size. You'll notice on this particular pattern, if this was the end of the pattern and this was a half side of the bottom, you would have one side of the tape is just square, and the other side has to have the corner, the 90-degree arrow tip cut into it. And you're going to have to apply that tape very precisely along the bottom there, the edge, and into the corner so that it mates up very nicely. And then the other trick that's even a little bit more exacting is you're going to want to cut squares of the tape. And this is the reason why I chose to use tape that was the same width as the pleats are. It makes it a little bit easier. But you're going to want to cut squares of the tape and apply them across each of the diagonal folds of the corner pleats. So there'll be a square here that's put across it. The fold of the pleat goes diagonally across the square of tape you cut. So there'll be one piece for each of these hill folds on the outside, and then on the inside you won't have to do that on the inside because they're all valley folds. So on the outside you're going to be doing all of them on the outside on the corners. So you'll have every one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in this case of those square pieces of tape. And it actually helps to do the corners first. If you tape all these with square pieces of tape first, then later on when you lay down the pieces of tape for the hills, it'll help cover up those squares and help them to stick better. So that's essentially what you're going to be doing. Before you assemble the bellows, you have to apply all the tape to all the ridges, not valleys, right? Ridges on both sides. And finally, to bring the bellows closed at the very end, the very bottom where the three sides come around and the two half sides at the bottom, the two half sides are going to meet in the middle with a straight seam. And so you're simply going to stretch the bellows out on that straight side. If this was the other side of it, you would simply stretch them out, butt them up together very carefully, and put a piece of tape all along there to seal up the bellows, and that closes it up into a I guess you would call it a rectangular or square tunnel, a pleated tunnel, as this example shows. And so I usually use that, make that last seam on the bottom of the bellows just like the way they did it here in the speed graphics. If you're making a bellows for a particular film format, for a particular camera design, how do you size it properly? Well, one of the things to keep in mind is that the valley folds on the outside, which are the ridges on the inside of the bellows, those have to give you a clearance in the inside of the bellows, a proper clearance for the film format that you're using. So you want to make it oversized enough to where you have proper clearance on the inside, as this you might be able to see there. So this is a 5x7 format. This opening is actually 6.5 by 4.5 roughly. That's how you're going to make it oversized. Now, I used inch-thick pleats on this camera bellows, but the prototype example I showed you here, these are actually 3/4 inch. So this is actually a little bit finer of a bellows, more folds, they're not as deep, and so the bellows itself is not going to be as thick, and you could it probably would be a little bit more efficient in terms of, if you look at how the overall dimensions of this compared to the film format, this bellows has to be quite a bit bigger than the film format, just because the pleats are so long, or so wide, I should say. But if you make it about 3/4 inch, it seems like it's a pretty good size. And my Intrepid camera, which is off camera over there, it looks like they're using something close to 3/4 inch also on its bellows, although it's tapered. Which gets us to the subject of, if you were going to do this same design with a tapered bellows, how would you do it? So for a pleated bellows made from one continuous sheet of stiff paper that is tapered, you're going to want to have to draw on a piece of paper a diagram something like this. You're going to have the 3 full sides here, here, and here, and the 2 half sides on the end, and because they're tapered, the bellows being smaller in the front than in the back, it's going to make this kind of a curved section. And the problem with this is that you're going to find the largest piece of craft paper that you can find is going to limit how big the bellows can be. It's just more efficient to make the bellows a non-tapered, given the sizes of papers that you have available. But basically, where the corners are, the 2 guidelines you draw to define the diagonal pleats on the corners, they're going to have to start closer together here and get wider toward the back of the bellows. And so it's a tapered corner pleat like that. So it's a little bit more complicated, and it makes it a little less efficient in terms of how big of a bellows you can put on one piece of paper. Now you might think to yourself, well, what if I just want to make a big bellows like for an 8x10 camera, and I'm limited in how I do that? Well, one idea that you might want to consider is, if you look at the prototype I built here just as an example, you have a corner that's been pleated in the middle of the paper, and then you have what effectively could be the middle of each side, middle of 2 sides. You could have a bellows that's twice as wide as this, and you could have, instead of the 1 cloth tape joint along the bottom of the bellows that closes it up, you could have 4 of them, 1 on each side, and that's how you could make a much larger bellows from smaller sheets of paper. But it is a little more tricky joining 2 of these together and getting that tape nice and even and pressed down, everything like that. But it's possible to do that to make a larger bellows. So my advice to you, if you're starting out on a new camera project where you want a bellows, my advice would be to first do some practice bellows with some craft paper like this cardstock, some stiff paper that you can crease, you can score with a ballpoint pen and crease it. Get experienced, accomplished with being able to do these folds and making these bellows. And then instead of wasting expensive gaffers tape, these are like $20 a roll or $15 or $20 a roll for the true gaff tape. This is ProGaff brand, ProGaff. Instead of wasting expensive gaffers tape on a practice bellows out of non-light tight paper, just go ahead and use some Scotch tape, some transparent office type of tape, just to get practice to how you have to cut the tape and make the angles on the tip of the tape strips to fit into there, and how to do the little squares. And then once you're accomplished at doing a practice bellows, then try to prototype the full-size bellows in the size and shape you want out of the same kind of craft paper, and get experience with folding it and constructing it, especially if it's going to be a tapered bellows or a 4-section bellows where it's made out of 4 corner pieces like that. That would save you a lot of time and headache and wasting material, preventing you from wasting materials like the expensive gaffer's tape. And that reminds me also, if you're going to buy gaffer's tape, make sure it's the real gaffer's tape, actual cloth gaffer's tape. Don't get the stuff that looks textured cloth, but it's actually plastic duct tape. That's not the real stuff, and it won't stick as well, and it won't be as durable, and it probably won't be light tight. Oh, and before I go, just to change the subject a little bit, but my last video, the video I made last week on the Lumen box camera, I might have mentioned how I was going to make an alternative back for doing a curved film plane, and that's what I did here. This is made out of all black foam core board, and yes, black gaffer's tape, and some of this heavy black craft paper. It's the same material that the bellows was made out of, actually. And so I have this here that, let me see if I have a piece of paper. I don't know if I have a piece of paper cut. Probably not. But anyway, it uses paper that's 8 inches wide by 4.5, 8 inches long by 4.5 inches wide. So if you take photo paper in the 8x10 size, cut it in half to make it 8 by 5, and then cut the 5-inch down to 4.5, and it fits in here. And that, I have a little notch here on the bottom that fits over the back lip of the camera, and so this thing inserts right into the back like that and closes right up if you hold your mouth just right, like that. And it puts the center of the curved film plane right at the same focal point as you would with the ground glass viewing screen. So if you compose the image and focus it so the center of the image is in focus, then when you put the back in place, the center of the paper will be in focus. And I do have one image that I made with it, and I have it up on Flickr, and I think I'll put that image at the end of the video here just to show you. So anyways, guys, you take it easy, and I hope you have good luck with your Bellows project and your large format camera if you decide to make one. And until next time, have yourselves a great day.